Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going way back, like way back, to explore the surprisingly complex world of hunter-gatherer sex lives. You might think cavemen were all about grunting and dragging women by the hair, but get ready for some serious plot twists. We're talking infidelity, power struggles, and yes, even kinks that would make a Roman emperor blush. We've got cave paintings, anthropological studies, even observations from modern foraging tribes. A whole prehistoric soap opera waiting to be unpacked.
It's amazing how much we can learn about ourselves by looking at our evolutionary roots. We often think of modern relationships as unique. But the truth is, humans have been wrestling with the same desires and dilemmas for millennia.
Okay, let's set the stage. The source material really emphasizes how the hunter-gatherer lifestyle shaped everything. For 96% of human history, that was its small, nomadic bands constantly on the move for food and safety.
This constant struggle for survival had a huge impact on relationships and mating strategies. Think about it. Early marriage wasn't just about romance. It was about forming alliances and ensuring the group's continuation.
The research mentions girls getting married around 13, sometimes even younger. That's mind-blowing. But I guess in those conditions, every year counts towards survival.
Exactly. And while it might seem shocking to us, early parenthood likely had profound psychological effects. Imagine teenagers thrust into adult roles, responsible for raising children in incredibly harsh environments. Did it create a sense of resilience? Or did it lead to repressed emotions and social structures we can only speculate about?
That's a great point. We often focus on the physical challenges, but the emotional landscape must have been intense. Speaking of intense, the source highlights this interesting paradox. While monogamy seems to have evolved early on, infidelity and polygyny were still pretty common. It's like those primal urges were battling with the need for social stability.
This is where things get fascinating.
Yeah.
Monogamy might have been the ideal, but those deep-seated desires for multiple partners, especially among high-status males, persisted. You can see it in the recurring theme of paternity fraud. Our ancestors were just as worried about being cheated on as we are.
The source even mentions some pretty harsh punishments for infidelity, even infanticide in some cases. Talk about high stakes. It makes you wonder how much those ancient anxieties about infidelity and competition still linger in us today.
It's certainly a question worth pondering. Are our modern relationship dramas just echoes of those ancient struggles? It's like we're still subconsciously playing out the same scripts.
All right, now for a topic that always sparks debate. Gender roles. The classic image is men as hunters, women as gatherers. But the research suggests it wasn't as simple as man the provider, woman the homemaker.
Right. Women played a vital role in providing food, sometimes even more so than men, depending on the environment. However, the source does highlight a consistent pattern of male dominance, especially in harsher environments. Was this purely due to physical strength, or were there deeper social and psychological factors at play?
The source mentions aggression and competition as key factors in male dominance, traits we see throughout primate evolution. So maybe it's not just about brute force, but also about how those traits translated into social power.
Exactly. And this ties into another aspect of hunter-gatherer life that often gets overlooked. Violence. The murder rates, especially among men, were shockingly high compared to modern societies.
The research paints a pretty grim picture. Constant competition for resources, mates, status, all fueling a level of violence we can barely comprehend today.
It's a sobering reminder that cooperation and empathy, values we often consider civilized, were hard-won achievements, even more intriguing. The source brings up hybristophilia, the attraction to those who commit violent acts.
Okay, hybristophilia, that's a new one for those who aren't familiar. It basically means being attracted to criminals or people who've done terrible things. Think about the fascination some people have with serial killers. That's a modern manifestation of this very ancient phenomenon. So if violence was so prevalent in those times, could hybristophilia have served some evolutionary purpose?
That's a question that researchers are still grappling with. Did it signal a preference for strong, dominant partners, even if that dominance manifested in a destructive way? It's a disturbing thought, but it highlights how even seemingly negative traits could have had adaptive functions in certain contexts.
It really challenges our modern sensibilities, doesn't it? It makes you think about how our definitions of good and bad are shaped by our current environment. But evolution doesn't always play by those rules. Now, before things get too dark, let's shift gears to something a bit more, well, fun. The source explores how the development of abstract thought in Homo sapiens led to a whole new dimension of human sexuality. Kinks.
It's fascinating. We often think of kinks as modern inventions, but the truth is, Many of them have roots in our primal past. The source delves into BDSM, for example, and how dominance and submission play on the subversion of evolutionary strategies for pair bonding.
So, getting tied up and spanked is actually a window into our evolutionary history. Who knew? But seriously, how does something that seems so, let's say, unconventional connect to the basic need to find a mate and reproduce?
That's where it gets really interesting. Imagine a world where resources are scarce, competition is fierce, and mate choice is often limited. Being able to find arousal in unconventional scenarios, even those involving dominance and submission, might have actually increased your chances of reproductive success.
So it's like those primal urges were adaptable, finding outlets even in seemingly unfavorable situations. It's almost like our brains were wired for both the vanilla and the spicy sides of desire.
Exactly. And this adaptability is key to understanding the wide range of kinks we see, not just in humans, but across the animal kingdom. It's a reminder that sexuality is much more than just procreation. It's a complex interplay of biology, psychology, and social dynamics.
Well, I think we've laid a solid foundation for our deep dive, from early marriage to infidelity, violence, and even kinks. It seems like our hunter-gatherer ancestors were dealing with a lot of the same relationship drama that we still grapple with today.
Absolutely. And in the next part, we'll delve even deeper into some specific kinks and explore their possible evolutionary underpinnings. Get ready for some eye-opening revelations. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been laying the groundwork, exploring how the hunter-gatherer lifestyle shaped everything from marriage patterns to gender roles. Now, let's get into some truly fascinating territory. Those kinks and fetishes that seem so modern, yet might actually be echoes of our primal past.
All right, you've piqued my curiosity. Last time, we touched on BDSM and how it plays on those deep-seated desires for dominance and submission. But how does that translate into specific scenarios? The source mentions some pretty intense examples.
Let's start with female submissive scenarios. We often see a woman surrendering control over mate choice, essentially putting herself at the mercy of someone who might not be the ideal provider or protector.
So, instead of carefully selecting a partner based on those evolutionary criteria, she's choosing the opposite, someone who might even be dangerous.
Exactly. And the source points out that many of the acts performed in these scenarios might not even be directly pleasurable for the woman. It's about the power dynamic, the deliberate subversion of those evolutionary expectations.
The source describes scenarios where a woman is treated as a disposable sex object, forced to submit to multiple partners. It's pretty far from the romantic ideal of a loving, supportive relationship.
That's the point. It's about taking those primal urges for pair bonding and turning them on their head. The male dominant in these scenarios often represents the antithesis of what a woman would typically seek in a long-term partner.
It's like a deliberate rejection of those evolutionary drives. But why would that be arousing? It seems counterintuitive.
It is a paradox, isn't it? But remember, human sexuality isn't always about logic or even simple pleasure. It's about this complex interplay of power, vulnerability, and those deep-seated desires that often defy explanation. Now, on the flip side, we have male submissive scenarios. Here, the man is often excessively exploited for his utility as a provider, but receives little sexual reward in return.
So, he's working hard, providing resources, but not getting any of the, shall we say, benefits.
Precisely. And this is often accompanied by humiliation and the denigration of his masculinity. Again, it's about twisting those evolutionary expectations, playing with those deeply ingrained gender roles.
It's interesting that the source also brings up forced by scenarios. It seems like no matter what your sexual orientation, BDSM can tap into these primal urges in a way that transcends traditional categories.
Absolutely. And the research emphasizes that these responses aren't just about rejecting our evolutionary past, but also potentially tapping into alternative mating strategies that might have been advantageous in certain prehistoric contexts.
Okay, so help me understand that. How could being into BDSM, even if it involves scenarios that seem counterproductive to reproduction, actually be beneficial from an evolutionary perspective?
Think about it. In a world with limited mate choice, maybe even coerced mating, being able to find arousal in less than ideal situations could increase your chances of passing on your genes. It's a form of adaptability, making the best of a challenging situation.
It's like finding a way to thrive, or at least survive, even when the odds are stacked against you.
Exactly. And the source points out that we see hints of this behavior even in other primates. For example, a lower-ranking male baboon might persist in pursuing a female even after she's rejected him, hoping she'll eventually come around. It's not about what's logical or ideal. It's about persistence and seizing whatever opportunities arise.
So even those seemingly extreme BDSM scenarios might be echoes of ancient behaviors that helped our ancestors navigate the complexities of prehistoric mating. That's a whole new way of looking at it. Now, let's move on to a fetish that's always intrigued me, even if it's a bit, well, niche. Foot fetishes. What's the evolutionary connection there? It seems so far removed from those basic survival instincts.
The source suggests it's all about the pedestal effect, essentially. By focusing on a specific body part, you're elevating your partner to a higher level of desirability, almost like worshiping at the altar of their feet.
Okay, I could see that. But why feet? Of all the body parts to fixate on, it seems so.
But that's where the interplay of ideal mate selection and sexual rejection comes in. It's like saying, this person is so amazing, I'm not even worthy of their, well, everything. Just their feet will do.
It's almost a form of self-deprecation, amplifying the partner's attractiveness by putting yourself down.
Precisely. And this can apply to other seemingly random body parts too. Armpits, kneecaps, even earlobes. It's about finding that specific element that triggers those intense feelings of desire, often mixed with a sense of unattainability.
And the source also connects this to the fetishization of bodily fluids, like ejaculate. It's fascinating how these seemingly disparate things, feet, fluids, even specific acts, can all be linked back to this core idea of placing your partner on a pedestal, whether as a mark of disdain or as a symbol of intense attraction.
It speaks to the amazing complexity of human desire, how our brains can create these intricate webs of meaning and arousal from seemingly simple things.
All right, now for a fetish that's often shrouded in secrecy and even shame, cuckolding and cuck-queening. The source describes these as ways of finding arousal in situations that were, from a purely evolutionary standpoint, should be triggering feelings of jealousy and distress.
This is where things get really interesting. For a supposedly monogamous species like humans, seeing your partner have sex with someone else should, logically, be a threat to your reproductive success. But for some, these situations can actually be incredibly arousing.
So, how does that work? How do you go from feeling threatened to feeling turned on by your partner's infidelity?
The source explains that for men, cuckolding often involves the perception that their partner is so desirable that she's chosen another, supposedly better man. It's a twisted form of validation, turning jealousy into a source of excitement.
It's not really about the other man at all. It's about the perceived value of your own partner, even if it comes at the cost of your own ego.
Exactly. And the source points out that this often involves elements of humiliation and emasculation for the man, which, again, ties into that theme of subverting traditional masculinity that we see in BDSM.
It's like finding pleasure in relinquishing control, in admitting that someone else might be superior in some way. It's a very complex dynamic. Now, what about cuck-queening? That's the female equivalent, right?
Yes, and it's often misunderstood. The source emphasizes that it's not simply about watching your partner have sex with other women. It's about finding arousal in the idea that your partner is so virile and attractive that he can attract multiple partners.
So, instead of feeling threatened by the competition, you're actually turned on by it.
It's a way of turning that potential threat into a source of pride and even validation. It's like saying, my partner is so desirable that other women can't resist him, and that makes me feel powerful.
It's interesting that both cuckolding and cuck-queening seem to involve this element of power play, even though the dynamics are reversed.
Exactly. And the source points out that cuck-queening can also involve elements of humiliation for the woman, like being compared unfavorably to the other women her partner is having sex with.
It seems like even within these seemingly taboo fetishes, we're still seeing those core themes of dominance, submission, and the complex interplay of power and desire. Okay, we've covered BDSM, foot fetishes, and cuckolding, cuck-queening. What other kinks does the source connect to our evolutionary past?
It touches on a few others, like furries, role-playing, and exhibitionism, linking them to the desire to break social constraints, explore power dynamics, or tap into those primal urges that are often suppressed in modern society.
So it seems like no matter how out there a kink might seem, there's often a deeper story to tell, a connection to our evolutionary past that might surprise us.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that human sexuality is far more complex and nuanced than we often give it credit for. Well, I think we ventured pretty deep into the world of prehistoric kinks for now. Before we wrap up, are there any overarching takeaways you'd like to emphasize? We've been on quite the journey exploring the sex lives of our hunter-gatherer ancestors.
It really has been fascinating.
From early marriage and polygyny to some truly eye-opening fetishes, it seems like prehistoric humans were dealing with a lot of the same relationship dramas and desires that we still grapple with today.
It's fascinating how much of what we consider modern actually has roots stretching back tens of thousands of years.
One thing that's really stuck with me is the idea that even seemingly extreme desires, like those we discussed around BDSM or cuckolding, might actually be echoes of ancient mating strategies that helped our ancestors survive and reproduce in challenging environments.
It really challenges our preconceived notions of what's normal or abnormal, doesn't it? It suggests that human sexuality isn't this rigid black and white thing, but rather a fluid spectrum of desires and behaviors shaped by both biology and culture. Absolutely. It's like we're looking at this intricate tapestry woven from both our primal instincts and the social norms that have developed over time. But it does raise a question. If we're essentially hardwired with these ancient urges, does that mean we're destined to repeat the same patterns of behavior?
Yeah.
Are we just slaves to our evolutionary programming?
That's a question that has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries. While our biology undoubtedly plays a role, we also have the capacity for self-awareness and conscious choice. We're not simply robots acting out pre-programmed scripts.
So, we can understand those primal urges, those deep-seated desires, and choose how we want to express them, or even choose not to express them at all.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance between honoring our instincts and navigating the complexities of the modern world. We have the power to shape our own sexualities, to define what's healthy and fulfilling for us as individuals and as a society.
It's like having this ancient map that shows us where we came from, but we still get to choose our own path, to forge our own destinies.
I like that analogy. It emphasizes that understanding our evolutionary past doesn't limit our choices, but rather gives us a richer context for making informed decisions about our relationships and our own sexual expression.
And perhaps it also encourages a bit more compassion and less judgment towards ourselves and others.
Absolutely. The more we understand about human nature, about the long and winding road that has led us to where we are today, the more empathetic we can become.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and I hope it's left you with a sense of wonder and a newfound appreciation for the complexities of human sexuality, both ancient and modern.
It's been a pleasure exploring these fascinating topics with you. And remember, folks, the next time you find yourself questioning your own desires or the choices of others, take a moment to consider the long and fascinating journey that has shaped our sexual landscape.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and embrace the wild, kinky, and often scandalous